right. Well, first of all, thank you all for coming and listening to this presentation. I think you'll enjoy it. I've had a lot of fun with it. I wish I was there because you were doing a drawing, and I'm going to hold this up. I don't know if you guys can see. This is a Jimson weed pod, and I'm going to be talking about Jimson weed in a bit. It's very toxic, so you don't want to eat it. But anyway, we could have given this away because there's about 100 seeds in here, which is a really, really cool plant. Anyhow, the book that I've written recently was a direct result of my Monarch Butterfly book, which I wrote and came out last year, which was a natural history of the monarch butterfly migration. And as I started to pay closer attention to the insects and plants and how they interacted with each other, it just made me pay attention in general to more plants. And I got to know all these plants, and I just felt compelled to sort of share the stories of these plants, especially in today's context where we have so many factors that are contributing to undermining of the ecosystem, particularly climate change. So one of the things that the main premise of this book is kind of a riff off of Doug Tallamy, who promoted the whole idea that we should all take 1/3 of our landscape and turn it into a native habitat, which would create the largest homegrown national park in the world. And so he suggests that everybody, no matter what size of yard you have, even if you just have a balcony with a couple of potted plants on it, make one out of every 3 feet of that space into native plant habitat. And it would really, really help change things for the better. And the other thing that he talks about in the book is, he says, what if we just chose the plants like what if we did it like cooking? Like what if we only cooked for taste and only ate things that were fat and sweet? We would end up with a very unhealthy body. And so the corollary there is, why are we choosing plants just because they're beautiful? That's no longer enough reason to choose plants for our yard. And you guys know this, being members of the Native Plant Society. But in any case, I just took that metaphor a little bit further. And I suggest in my book that we all treat our landscapes or our gardens like we're hosting a dinner party. And anybody who's hosted a dinner party knows it's a huge amount of work. You've got to plan for, create a menu, shop for, cook for, set the table, hang out with a bunch of people, clean the mess up. And it's a huge investment of time and energy and resources. And so if we're going to do that, if you're going to have a dinner party, would you only invite people to your dinner party who are beautiful? Or would you rather have people who have interesting stories to tell, who provide some kind of community service, or in the case of plants, some kind of service to the ecosystem? Perhaps they're a specific service to the landscape, like they hold soil in place when it floods, or they have defensive features like prickly pear or barbs to ward off invaders, plants that you can eat, that you can make tea from. And so all of those qualities were considered when I chose the plants for the book. And each plant featured in the book, of the 25 plants, has to have at least 3 qualities besides being beautiful. And so that is the definition of a plant with purpose for me. So here's an example. First of all, can you eat it? And here on the top right, and I actually brought this one, if you guys can see this, I brought this from my yard. It's a passion flower fruit, and you can actually eat this straight off the vine. You can eat this plant. It's the host plant to the Gulf fritillary butterfly. Over here, we've got sunflower. You can eat the seeds. You can actually eat the flower head. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Hang on. You can eat the flower head. Obviously, butterflies, nectivores, birds love that plant because butterflies and pollinators can slurp up the nectar and gather the pollen, and then birds can follow up and eat the seeds that fall on the ground, or birds perch on the stems of those sunflowers and eat those seeds right out of the head. Down here on the bottom right, we've got prickly pear, which you can eat the nopales, which are the petals, these green pads. You can also eat the fruits, which these guys turn into a beautiful bright red fruit. You can make all kinds of cool drinks out of. This is Turk's cap flower. Did you know that you can eat those flowers? Great shade plant. It's in the book. The flowers look a little bit like a Turk's cap or a fez, but they're very sweet. Hummingbirds love this plant, and I like to throw these on top of pancakes. And when you flip the pancake over, the flowers kind of caramelize, and it just tastes great. And it's a very novel and kind of fun thing to serve, especially if you have kids. Then over here on the left, one of my favorite plants that we have at our ranch on the Llano River, we have a broad watershed and we have just acres of these wild garlic or wild onions. And every part of this plant is edible. You can eat the tops, you can eat the flowers, you can eat the whole plant. The little flowers turn into these little bulblets that are kind of like little garlic cloves, and you can saute those in oil and make them crunchy and sprinkle them on your salad. So these are just 5 examples of foods that you can eat that are in the book. Can you make tea from it? That's another thing that I learned in the course of researching this book. I had no idea that so many of the plants in my yard I can make tea from. And I'm a big fan of Celestial Seasonings fruit tea. I always buy their fruit tea mix, and I make a big, huge pitcher of non-caffeinated iced tea that comes with, you know, peach, blueberry, raspberry, whatever. But I could also, I went out and bought tea bags and I started making my own tea. This is actually bee balm flowers, but you can make them out of basil, you can make them out of agarita. There's just tons of things that you can make tea from. My serious foraging friends tell me that technically you're not allowed to call it tea unless it's some specific variety like Earl Grey, Chinese tea, I don't know, but basically flavored water, and I call it tea. Does it serve wildlife? This is a giant swallowtail butterfly, beautiful yellow-bodied creature, very captivating. It's nectaring on goldenrod, which is in the book. But this butterfly hosts on any kind of citrus, and I have citrus is in the book as well. But I mean, citrus includes everything from rue to lemon lime trees, hopwood tree, and so there's a huge number of things that are technically citrus that draw giant swallowtails and other kinds of swallowtails that you can have in your yard that also provide nectar. And also you can make, I made vinegar out of this goldenrod, by the way, but citrus is just obviously so useful. I have my famous margarita recipe in there for those of you who have a lime tree. Don't forget to bring it in when it freezes. And then this is one of my favorite aspects of the book is just, does it have a fun story? I like to say that every plant has a story, you just have to dig. Up here on the top left, we've got frostweed, which you may or may not be familiar with, but frostweed is super cool plant, late season nectar plant. Typically flowers white, beautiful flowers in the fall when the monarchs are moving through and other, you know, insects and wildlife are moving south for the winter. But if you happen to be home and you have frostweed, on the first freeze of the year, you need to go outside early in the morning and observe these amazing little ice crystals that what happens is the plant stem splits open and the phloem from the plant forms these amazing little ice crystals. And they're like little ice sculptures. And you can see all of these, every single plant in my yard that's frostweed did that morning. Got to go out early because they'll melt as the sun comes up. But I have actually gathered these and put them in my freezer, and I've sprinkled them on top of cocktails. I looked up the plant. It's not poisonous. I don't know if I would recommend that, but I did it. I was fine. And I've always been kind of curious why all these fancy artisanal cocktail makers don't use this as some kind of special, you know, garnish on their cocktails. On the right here, we've got passion flower, which that fruit came from that I showed you earlier. But this plant is so dramatic and it has such a story. It was believed that this somehow symbolized Jesus Christ, you know, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost of these things. There's 10 petals for the 10 disciples. There's all this religious symbolism associated with this plant, and there's a ton of different varieties of passion flower. The one that we have here produces that fruit that's very puffy and sort of filled with air and seeds. But there's other ones that produce like really hard fruits, but you can eat those. You can make drinks out of them. You can put them in a salad. Lots of different ways to do it. And here's the prickly pear fruit, the pitaya. This plant is amazing, and it's in the book. This is the fruit. You can make drinks out of this. You got to get those glochids off, and I learned a really cool way to do that. You put these in a colander and you just shake it, and all these little barbs come off of it, and you can actually eat that. But the other amazing thing about prickly pear is that you probably noticed, if you've been paying attention, that a lot of times prickly pear has this white fuzzy stuff on the pads. And if you smash that white fuzzy stuff, it turns this color, bright magenta. And that is a cochineal, that is an insect. And if you smash it, for some reason, it turns from white to very hot pink. And that hot pink is used to make dye. And the San Antonio missions here in San Antonio were that they used that dye to paint some of the walls in the San Antonio missions. Apparently, it was also used to color Campari, the Italian liqueur, for many, many years. And they apparently stopped doing that a while back because people objected to the fact that it wasn't technically vegetarian. My understanding is they're going back because, you know, there's not a better alternative, but kind of a cool story about prickly pear that you might not have known. And then over here on the left, we have Jimson weed. I do actually have a Jimson weed pod here that you can see. And I've been handing these out at events that I go to in person. I always warn people. I've told all my editors and others that you have to be very diligent about warning people that Jimson weed is incredibly toxic. Every part of that plant is toxic. I heard earlier that you guys are doing a session on toxic plants, and I'm hoping that it includes Jimson weed, but we're going to talk a lot about that. And Jimson weed has an amazing story that I'll tell you in a moment because I have a whole section on that. But I mean, these plants all have histories, just like people. And I find it really disappointing that, you know, we teach our children what lions and tigers and bears are, but we don't teach them what frostweed or passion flower or prickly pear or Jimson weed is. And these are plants that surround us, that make our lives happen, that are here part of our landscape. And whereas a kid will never see a lion or tiger or bear, except maybe in a zoo, they are going to probably run into some of these plants, and they need to know these plants because the first thing for conserving something is knowing its name. So teach your kids the names of plants. And then another aspect to the plants with purpose is, does the plant serve a particular landscape service? And this is my house on the right. This is an alleyway. And my son is an architect, and he designed this house for me and my parents, who lived in the back. We had a little casita in the back for a while, and until they both passed away. Whoops, sorry about that. But anyway, when I built this house, I got to do my garden for the first time, where I had a clean slate and I got to do everything from scratch. There was nothing there. It was an empty lot, and that was really fun. But I also got to buy a lot of really cool new furniture because it was like a new style that we didn't have before. And so we have this front porch, and I bought all this really amazing lawn furniture, like a slider, some really beautiful bright colored wicker chairs, and I put them over here to the right of this alleyway, and there's just a small fence here. And I told my landscaper, Charles Bartlett, who's a good friend and a very knowledgeable botanist, I said, man, what are we going to do? And he goes, Monica, I've got just the plant for you. And Charles used to be a botanist for the Department of Defense. And he said that they use this plant with Citrus trifoliata, which is one of probably the most freeze-tolerant citrus. And they use this plant to graft to every other citrus plant, like Meyer lemons or limes or whatever, to make it more hardy. And so if you get a lemon or lime tree and it freezes, then typically it'll come back as this, because it's the only thing that survives a freeze. So if you're going to plant citrus, you might want to put it in a pot where you can bring it in. But in any case, I've had this plant, and Charles told me that when he was a botanist for the Department of Defense, he used this plant around nuclear facilities to deter mischievous teens, you know, interlopers, criminals, snoopy, you know, curious people. And you can see these barbs. They're quite intimidating, and I've been stabbed myself a couple of times, but I have never, ever had a problem on my front porch. I've never had anything stolen because this plant is serving a very legitimate landscape service in my yard, and I've heard people use it in front of their teenage daughters' bedroom windows as well. And then another aspect to the book, the plants that I recommend in the book, all 25, are appropriate for hot climates. And we need to really think about this in Texas. I live in San Antonio. It's been over 100 degrees. It was 100 degrees in May this year, which is unheard of. Well, maybe not unheard of, very unusual. Right today, the last couple of days, it's been in the 90s with, you know, a heat factor of 105, incredibly humid. Yes, we've gotten a lot of rain, but it is really, really hot, really, really early. And so you need to choose plants that can take that heat. And here, this is a yard. I lived in Austin for a year back in 2011 because my job required that I be in Austin 4 days a week. And I thought it would just be easier to just rent an apartment, and my company paid for it. So it worked out. And I asked my landlord, whose whole front yard was Bermuda grass, I said, I need to garden or I will die. And she said, yes, fine, you can have half the yard. So I took that yard and I put all these plants in. And this is Jimson weed over here on the white flowers. We got milkweed, lantana, and this is cowpen daisy in the back. And there was no irrigation in this yard. I mean, I would go out maybe twice a week and water, and I would just hold my water hose on the roots of the plant and count to 10, move on to the next plant. But these are plants that can take the heat, and that's very, very important in our part of the world. So if I were having a dinner party, hang on. Whenever you're having a dinner party, you often think about who's going to sit next to who. And as the hostess or the host, you get to choose who you're going to sit next to. And I don't know about you, but I always like to pick who I think at that moment in time is the most interesting guest. And in this case, if I were going to sit next to one of these plants in my book, I would want to sit next to Jimson weed, because Jimson weed is such an interesting plant. It has stories to tell. First of all, it has this gorgeous white flower. This flower blooms at night. It gives off an incredibly fragrant scent, and mostly plants at night that bloom at night often are white for visibility, and they give off a strong fragrance to draw in pollinators. In this case, Jimson weed is the host to the sphinx moth. And I actually discovered this plant at our ranch on the Llano River. I took a night hike one night. I was walking along and I saw these plants just cropping up on the side of the road. And this Jimson weed does like disturbance. It's very easy to grow, doesn't need any water. It loves hot, sunny weather. And while I was walking, I just saw all these sphinx moths. They're also called hummingbird moths. And they were just buzzing around, flying around, nectaring on this beautiful, gorgeous plant with this incredible aroma that was wafting through the breeze. This is the caterpillar of the sphinx moth, which is closely related to the tomato hornworm. And Jimson weed is in the tomato family, along with nightshades and tomatoes and potatoes, solanaceae. But yes, you will have caterpillars, and this one I think has like 7 stripes, and the tomato hornworm has 6 stripes. You have chickens. Birds love eating these caterpillars. Apparently it's not toxic to birds. I don't know why. This is the flower. This will bloom that night. The plant has a very particular smell. I think it smells like chocolate. Some people don't like the smell, but you can smell the plant, and it definitely has all kinds of chemicals in it. And my understanding is that adventurous teenagers have smoked it, have gotten really sick, gone to the hospital. Some people actually have died if they have an allergic reaction. So absolutely do not want to consume this plant. People keep asking me if it's safe for dogs. I mean, my dogs have never touched the plant. It does have a very strong odor, and my experience has shown me that it just seems like toxic plants in general have a strong smell or a bad taste, and dogs don't want that, and maybe they'll try one bite and they'll never try it again. But in this case, this plant I think is so worth it, but don't eat it. This is the Jimson weed seed pod that I was holding up earlier, and this is also called Indian thorn apple. It has other names that I'll get to in a minute, but it's just like a really sort of cool looking, awesome, phenomenon of nature. And it has all those prickles all over it. Another sign that you shouldn't eat it. I mean, would you bite into that? Is your dog going to bite into that? No. But those seeds actually look kind of like chili pepper flakes. So, don't want to get confused with anything. What happens is that seed pod will dry out like this and bust out, and those seeds will fall all over the ground, and you'll have tons of Jimson weed. I brought 1 or 2 plants from the ranch, and I have Jimson weed all over my yard. And this weird weather that we've had this year with the really, really hot heat and all the rain, it's just made it come up everywhere. It loves the heat, but it's kind of enjoying this wet too. So I have a ton of Jimson weed. That's why I've been giving away these seed pods, because I have hundreds of them. But in any case, the other fascinating, cool story of Jimson weed is that it's one of the first examples of ethnobotanical warfare. The colonists during the American Revolution learned about Jimson weed from the indigenous peoples, and we're told, you don't want to eat this; it can be poisonous. You want to stay away from it. Put it on your, open wounds or anything like that. So when the British came over to reclaim, what they thought was theirs, the colonists made a stew out of Jimson weed, and this was in Jamestown, Virginia, and fed it to the Brits. And the British soldiers got incredibly sick and out of their minds for 7 to 10 days and bought the colonists a lot of time to prepare for war. And so that story has made the rounds. And as I said, it started in Jamestown, Virginia, and it originally was called Jamestown weed and eventually became Jimson weed. But there's even more. Way back when, thousands of years, hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, down on the Devil's River, there's an amazing archaeology project by the Shumla organization, which is this group of incredible female archaeologists who are documenting the cave paintings all along the Devil's River. And they have all these incredible, photography tools like that tell how old things are. But one of the things that they've discerned is that these are Jimson weed pods. And they call these power bundles. And apparently the native peoples way back when, you see them all over the place. Here, here, here. And here is another incredible etching. And the research that that the Shumla archaeologists have come around to is that indigenous peoples used Jimson weed very much like peyote, where they did something, they smoked it, they ate it, they knew how to prepare it. They knew what was enough or not too much, and they were able to communicate with the spirits, and that's why they called it their power bundle. And so one of the things that I do now, because since I have so much Jimson weed, is whenever I have an anniversary or a wedding or a momentous occasion, is I tie one of these power bundles, onto the gift with some ribbon to give that person, the extra power to communicate with the spirits and find their way in life. So I mean, that's a pretty incredible story that when you look at that simple plant, maybe you didn't know that about the plant, and it just has so much interesting stuff to share with us. Another really cool plant is sunflowers. There's many, many different varieties of sunflowers, asters. And this is actually a photo I took in Michigan. My husband and I went up to see his birthplace in Petoskey, Michigan, and there was a sunflower farm. And these are all mammoth sunflowers, which is a very particular variety with a ginormous sunflower head. I mean, this is probably like 8 or 10 inches across. And they just let you wander around the sunflower field. And some people make these faces in the sunflowers. But one of the things that's super cool about sunflowers that you may or may not already know is all of these, this is a flower head. And these are each flowers. So you can understand why a bee or a moth or a butterfly would love this plant, because they can literally just land on the flower head and slurp up nectar by not even moving or gathering pollen while sitting in place. And then obviously after that, after those flowers mature, underneath are all these sunflower seeds, and that's for the birds. So you've got gorgeous, beautiful flower. You've got edible seeds for humans, flowers for bees and butterflies. I mean, this plant has a lot going for it. And this is a really good picture that shows the flower and then the seeds. And this looks like those black oil sunflower seeds that we buy for birds. But I mean, a lot of people don't realize that all the asters, a daisy, cowpen daisy, which I'll get to in a minute, every one of those, the center of the flower is not, the flower is not that structure. What's the flower are all these little flowers inside that flower head, which is pretty amazing. And so one of the other really cool things about sunflowers is that they exhibit this thing called heliotropism, where they literally, their heads follow the sun. So if I mean, it's crazy that all of these sunflowers, every single one of them are all kind of looking in the same direction, right? And then here they are at the end of the day, looking in the opposite direction. That's because they have this innate sense to follow the sun to maximize the photosynthesis and growth and fuel for their organism. And so literally the sunflowers will follow their heads of the flower will follow the sun as it moves across the sky. And I actually planted some of these mammoth sunflowers in my front yard of a house I had temporarily while I was building this house that I'm in right now. I had like 5 or 6 of these flowers, and I would just like marvel at how in the morning I would go out and they'd be looking over to the left, and then as the day went on, they would just be tracking the sun, and at night they would drop their heads down. So pretty cool, fun thing to explain to kids. But the other really cool thing about this particular sunflower, this is a recipe that the folks at Baker Heirloom Seed Company came up with. and really popularized. I think it was in like 2022. It kind of made the rounds in all the foodie circles. But this is a flower head. This is the head. And what they did is they harvest this head before the seeds form. So like immature seeds, they had all that fluff and those flowers. They brushed that, we brushed that off, and then you've got this kind of naked sunflower head filled with all these future seeds. And when you look at them close, they actually look like little corn kernels. And so the recipe calls for taking a jar of sun-dried tomatoes and oil. You take some of that oil, you smear it all over the head of that sunflower head, and then you throw it on the grill. Oops. And then you grill it for 5 minutes, put more, take it off the grill, put sun-dried the tomatoes and some more oil on it, and then sprinkle it with fresh basil and serve it. And it tastes like a combination of corn and artichoke. And it's just a really kind of a fun, impressive, novel thing to serve. I made it a couple of times. The first time I made it, I waited too long and the seeds were mature and they were black. I don't know. I guess I didn't read the recipe closely, but it tasted like chicken scratch. So if you're going to do it, you've got to harvest these flower heads before the seeds start to get firm, because at this point they're very soft, like a kernel of corn, and it's just super tasty and kind of fun to mess around with and serve. My guests were impressed when I served this, so there you go. The other cool thing about certain sunflowers, and this is one of my favorite plants right here, cowpen daisy. It's a plant I met at the ranch. It's a disturbance plant. It's incredibly vigorous. It's the host plant to the border patch butterfly, which is this guy right here. And unlike the monarch butterfly, which we'll get to in a minute, the border patch butterfly lays its eggs in these clusters, and you'll see these sort of webs of eggs and like detritus that has been, as they morph through their stages and left behind things, you'll have these sort of like snarly webs of stuff. But then you've got this big mound of caterpillars, which is really kind of fun to observe and watch. They're not, going to sting you or anything. They're completely harmless. And you'll have lots of border patch butterflies in your yard after you let these guys do their thing. This is the chrysalis of the border patch, and you can see that it's left the cowpen daisy plant. It looks like it came over and made its chrysalis on some milkweed. And then, of course, it hatches, or ecloses, as we say, in the monarch butterfly and other worlds, into this gorgeous little creature flying all over your yard. So lots of cool stuff going for that plant. You can eat it, great nectar plant, great wildlife plant, heliotropic, host plant to the border patch, awesome plant. And of course, I couldn't, as the author of A Natural History of the Monarch Butterfly Migration, Its Rise and Fall, not include milkweed in the book. Milkweed is a really amazing plant in and of itself. And as you kind of dig into the milkweeds, you learn a lot about it. There's lots of research on it. It's one of the most studied, monarchs are one of the most studied creatures on the planet. I think probably, one of the top 5 insects studied, bees, ants, others. But in any case, this is milkweed. And typically monarch butterflies lay their eggs on the underside of the milkweed leaves. Here's a little egg right here. It's kind of a cream colored spherical thing. And this is the first instar caterpillar. When this caterpillar hatches, it eats the eggshell as its first meal, and then it just starts eating the foliage of the milkweed plant. It gets bigger and bigger, goes through 5 stages, and finally ends up as this big chubby guy with black, yellow, and white stripes. And then ultimately it forms this beautiful jade green chrysalis. They're so gorgeous. That other chrysalis I showed you is kind of, it's cool, but this is pretty amazing. It's got these gold flecks on it, which my understanding is it sometimes helps the chrysalis disguise itself as morning dew. Those gold flecks also are the air holes through which the creature breathes. And if you ever have a chrysalis that you want to watch eclosure or the hatching of the butterfly, if you bring it in, you can usually tell when it's going to hatch, because it's usually 10 to 14 days as a chrysalis. But you can always tell if you check it every night. The night before it's going to make a butterfly, it seems to change color. It turns kind of pale, creamy, dark, gray, and then clear. And that usually happens around 9 or 10 at night. And then it seems like the next morning you get up and it's clear like this. And when it's clear like this, it's getting very close to dropping out of that shell. Ultimately, it drops out of the shell. It's very soft and malleable and velvety at that moment, very, very vulnerable. If it drops on the floor and starts to dry out with its wings folded, it will never fly. It'll die. It'll be crippled. But it likes to have something to hold on to. So I always try, if I have a chrysalis, I try to put a stick or something for it to grab onto, because ideally what it does is it hangs upside down and lets gravity do its thing by allowing the wings to unfold naturally to where they drape down and dry in a manner that allow it to fly. And this usually takes an hour or two. Once it drops out, you got to let it sort of get its wings on and like dry out to where it can take off. When it starts to look like this, and typically it'll like kind of beat its wings a couple of times, and you'll know it's ready to go, and then you can take it outside and let it go. But it's an incredible thing to witness. And you can have it the night before, you're going to bed, the next morning, get your cup of coffee, go sit by the chrysalis and watch it happen. But it's a lovely experience for anybody, but especially for children. So this right here, I mean, obviously is a monarch butterfly. I don't know if you know, but when you have these little black dots on the wings, that means it's a male. And those were pheromone sacs that supposedly are inactive these days, but that's one of the ways to tell the males from the females. If it has the family jewels on here like this, it's a male. And this is actually swamp milkweed, which we have on our ranch, grows right on the riverbanks. It's actually super easy to grow if you can get it. Pretty pink flowers. The leaves are very similar to tropical milkweed, more narrow than some of the other milkweeds. The other cool thing about about milkweed, beyond just its host plant status as the monarch butterfly plant, is it has this entire ecosystem around it. There's a book out called Monarchs and Milkweed by my friend Anurag Agrawal, who is a chemical ecologist and monarch butterfly expert. And there's a huge amount of study that's been devoted to determining the amount of chemicals in the milkweed leaves. And whatever this chemical composition, it attracts all kinds of insects. If you have milkweed, you're going to have aphids. If you have aphids, you're going to have wasps and you're going to have ladybugs. So you're going to have milkweed beetles and you're going to have milkweed bugs. And so there's like 5 or 10 insects at least, probably many more, I can't remember exactly, that only hang out on milkweed plants, or like love milkweed plants, or prefer milkweed plants. And it's like its whole, it's like a community, it's like a village. And Anurag calls this the monarchy, the milkweed village. I have a different name for it. In my book, I have a chapter on the monarchy, but it's more about the people that follow monarch butterflies. But it's just super fascinating when you start paying close attention to the milkweed, just how many things are going on there beyond the monarch. For example, this is a picture I took on the roadside. I think it was in May of this year. And there were probably, I think there's like 13 bees on this antelope horns milkweed. There were different kinds of beetles. There was a couple of moths. There's just tons of stuff going on. And this is such an odd looking bloom when you think about it. It looks like it's something from outer space, antelope horns milkweed. But the other really amazing thing about milkweed is the chemical makeup of the milkweed is one of the things that make monarch butterflies toxic to predators. And milkweed is filled with cardiac glycosides, which is that white milky latex. And if you've ever, I've tasted it, like, just a drop on my tongue. It has a really bitter taste. You don't want to eat it. Some people are allergic to it. It can burn some people's skin. I don't have that problem. But the famous monarch butterfly entomologist, Dr. Lincoln Brower, who studied chemical ecology and was one of the first people to piece this all together in terms of the makeup of the monarch, he would test different milkweeds and be able to determine perhaps where a butterfly came from, because it ate common milkweed, which is typically in Kansas and the Midwest, or antelope horns, which is typically in Texas. So he would know where these butterflies came from, and he would literally he came to our ranch one time during the Texas drought to collect butterflies, which he then ground up and then examined their DNA to be able to tell where the butterflies had, where the monarchs came from, because the caterpillars had eaten particular milkweeds that were only in particular places. But one of the things that he did, and this is a famous experiment, is he somehow tricked monarch caterpillars into eating cucumber and squash rather than milkweed. And so they did not have the toxic chemicals in them that makes them taste bad to predators. And so those caterpillars that he cultivated on squash and cucumbers, he fed them to a blue jay, and sort of after they became a butterfly, he fed them to a blue jay, and the blue jay ate them and was like, whoa, it tastes pretty good. But then he fed the blue jay a real monarch caterpillar who'd eaten milkweed, and the blue jay barfed and retched all over. And he took these photos, and this became known as the barfing blue jay photo. And since that time, it's been pretty well recognized and researched that the toxins in the milkweed make monarchs toxic to most predators. There are particular birds in Mexico, my understanding is orioles and certain rodents that will eat monarch butterflies. But typically a bird will taste a monarch butterfly one time and then never taste it again because it tastes terrible. And I've tagged probably 10,000 monarch butterflies, and I've often got a butterfly in my net that had like a bite out of its wing, and you can tell that a bird snatched at it, it was flying, and the bird tried to take a bite out of it, and the monarch got away, and they still flew. The other thing is that the nature typically tries to alert other creatures that something's toxic or bad for them or tastes bad by having bright colors like the orange and black, or like the prickles on the Jimson weed pods. And one of the reasons that monarchs have that amazing flight path, the way they fly, they just kind of glide through the air. They don't skitter. Like some butterflies, you'll watch them, they're just like skittering, zigzagging through the sky because they're evading predators. But monarchs don't have to do that because typically birds do not go after them because they know that they taste bad. So it's just another cool aspect to milkweed, which causes all of that. And apparently we have used those cardiac glycosides in different kinds of medications for heart problems. The other interesting thing about milkweed is that the seed pods have these amazing fluffs. Every single seed has a little puff fluff of downy stuff that assists in germination, because what happens is, this is I believe tropical milkweed, dried out, the seed pod splits open, the seeds and the fluff spill out. The wind catches those and carries them off to germinate elsewhere and spread. So interestingly, that fluff has, in the past, during World War II, this fluff was used to stuff life vests during World War II because they couldn't get down feathers. And in my book, I mention a company whose name I can't remember now off the top of my head, who started to make comforters and pillows out of milkweed fluff, which I am going to break down and buy someday, although they are quite expensive. But I just love that idea that you can make a pillow out of milkweed fluff. And I've even thought about, for our Monarch Butterfly Festival, having some kind of contest to gather milkweed fluff. And we're gonna make the biggest milkweed pillow in the world or something, but that's on my list. So also, I have not tried this because milkweed does have toxic properties, but my friend Anurag, the chemical ecologist, and others swear that you can eat spring shoots of common milkweed. He served this as asparagus to his family, who unwittingly enjoyed it. And you cut the stalks off when they're young. You boil it at least 3 times to boil out the bad taste and the toxins. And I assume, you could saute it in butter and probably taste pretty good. I have not done it. But also the famous forager Yule Gibbons, some of you may remember Yule Gibbons stalking the wild asparagus. He was famous for having milkweed parties, apparently. He loved milkweed and served it all the time. So, if you're ever starving in the forest and, there was milkweed available, know that you could conceivably consume it if you prepared it properly. So these are the plants with purpose, that are in the book. We talked about 3 of them in very specific terms, but there's plenty more stories to tell. As I like to say, every plant has a story. You just have to dig. And this is the book, if you want to grab it. I was so delighted that Doug Tellamy blurbed the book. He was very pleased with it. Linda Lameister from Central Texas Gardener also was a big fan. And then Mark Murray-Wither Forterbergen, who's the kind of the Texas foraging expert. He actually peer-reviewed the book and gave me a lot of incredible pointers and science-specific tips about how to improve it. It was very, very helpful. So I really appreciate your time today. And if you've got some questions, I'm happy to take them. I don't know how you want to do it, if you want to just have people speak up, or do we want to do it through the chat, whatever you guys suggest. Anybody? I don't see anything. Let's see if I can see the chat. I'm going to stop the share. I can't hear. The Lindheimer presenter is muted.
I'm sure. Okay, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi. I have a question about cooking the milkweed like asparagus. How do you know when the toxicity is out of it?
As I said, I have not done it, but in Anurag's book and in my book, I talk about the general wisdom is you have to boil it 3 times, throw out the water, and then supposedly that's good. And I know I've heard that pokeweed is also like that, like poke salad Annie. I don't know if you know that plant, but I have that plant in my yard. And supposedly it's a delicious plant too, but if you can't just eat it straight off the tree, you have to like boil it and, prepare it properly. So it would be something you'd have to research more thoroughly.
Okay.
But I have not done that one. I
Okay. Thank you.
haven't done it. Anybody else?
Questions in the chat?
Ask for me. Where do I get her book?
The question was, where do we get your book? From the audience here.
Everywhere books are sold, Amazon, hopefully your local bookstore. But yes, it's available. It's published by Texas A&M University Press. It came out May, I think, 13th. So it hasn't been out that long, but it's actually apparently doing pretty well. So, go out and buy it. If you get it on Amazon, I'd love to have a nice review. If you leave 5 stars and, shout it out if you like it. Yeah, thanks.
Is it linked on NetSop?
Do you know if it's linked on the Society's bookstore page yet? And if not, we need to get it in the right hands to make sure it is.
More. I have actually talked to Meg Inglis about it. I think she's actually leaving now, so I'm not sure.
Not till the end of the year. I know who to email.
Yeah. I mentioned it to her and she said she would do it, but I haven't checked lately. So, but yes, please tell all your friends. It's a fun read, and I'm getting really, really positive feedback on it. It's just something I really am passionate about it. And I think I've already said once that I'm gathering ideas for plants with purpose too. And I already have quite a few. So if you have any plants that you think, oh, you've got to do so-and-so plant, then just, please shout out, let me know, shoot me an email or hit me up on social media. But there's just so many cool plants that are completely ignored, and they deserve better. Because when you think about it, these plants make our entire lives possible. The air we breathe and the food we eat are all because of plants. So it's hard to understand why we don't give them more respect.
Yeah. Just to remind our audience, both in here and out there on Zoom, when you do go to the nipsot.org shop and you go to the bookstore, it's really a collection of Amazon links. And the Society earns a very small percentage of whatever you buy on Amazon if you arrive there through one of our links. So you may want to favorite that. And it's just kind of if you're an Amazon orderer, it's a good way to get a small commission for the Society. Anyway. I'd like to thank Monika so much for joining us this evening. A number of people in this room have been very excited about your book to come out. So we're pretty thrilled to have you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate all the support. So thank you so much. Any other questions?
Zoomland, you can feel free to unmute yourself and speak up if you have any questions.
I have a question. Could you ask me?
Yes, I can ask for you.
Could we have the name of the unique landscape service plant again, please?
the name of the unique landscape services plant. It was the citrus something with the thorns.
Citrus trifoliata, and as I said, I mean, I don't think it's a plant. I'm pretty sure it's available in nurseries, but a lot of people don't want that plant because of the barbs, but like taste, I wanted that. And if I had not had a very knowledgeable botanist helping me with my garden, I probably would not have known about it. But what's interesting is we planted 2 citrus trifoliata, and then I planted, I love margaritas. And I always wanted to have a lime tree. We planted a lime tree and we planted a Meyer lemon tree along that same fence. And then we had Storm Uri and everything died back. And when everything died back to the ground, what grew back out of the ground from the Meyer lemon tree and the lime tree was citrus trifoliata. And Charles, my friend, explained to me that citrus trifoliata is the most freeze resistant, freeze tolerant citrus, and it's very often used as root graft for the other plants that are more desirable for people. And so often, sometimes you'll have the Meyer lemon come back or the other one, but generally citrus trifoliata is the one that comes back. And you may or may not want that plant. It does have those stickers, so it just depends on, you know, what's your goal. For me, it's worked great, and I've had to cut it back because, I mean, it's gnarly, but, you know, I haven't had anything still over my front porch. I leave Amazon packages out there, and it's been very, very good service plant, so I appreciate it. And like I said, it's the host plant to that beautiful yellow bellied swallowtail, the giant swallowtail too.
The common name is flying Dutchman, flying dragon.
Leon Dominic here just shared with the group that one of the common names is the flying dragon.
Flying dragon is the name for citrus trifoliata?
Yes.
Yes, that's what
Really?
Leon was telling me.
Thank you for telling me. I did not.
Also of interest to the room is that deer don't especially like it.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, nobody really likes the plant because of its ornery thorns, but like I said, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, there's a place for that in the world. So thank
Hey,
you.
we could plant them at schools for a little added security, right?
There you go.
Anyway, thank you so much, Monica, for coming tonight. Any more questions before we let her go? Speak now or forever hold your peace.
If you guys want to stay in touch, go to the TexasButterflyRanch.com. That's my website. And that's where I write about plants and pollinators and, you know, whatever else. I just wrote a really fun story about flowering red yucca, which is one of the plants in the book. Did you know that flowering red yucca is actually an asparagus plant and that you can eat those red flowers? It tastes, supposedly it's part of the asparagus family. And I was in Dallas at a memorial service, and I grew up in Dallas. Anybody who's been to Dallas knows about Central Expressway. 200,000 cars per day move up and down that highway. And I was leaving Dallas, driving back to San Antonio, and I got on Central. I could not believe that they had the center meridian of Central, which is what it's called, just hundreds of flowering red yucca plants. And so you're driving along, fighting traffic, stressed out, and these beautiful red wands are like kind of waving at you. And it was so beautiful that I ended up researching it and writing an article about it, because I was like, this is incredible. Why are we not doing, this plant doesn't need any water. It's in this heat zone. It gets up to 150 degrees there. I was talking to the Texas Department of Transportation. So anyway, if you want to stay in touch, go to Texas Butterfly Ranch, subscribe. All the information on my books is up there. There's all kinds of plant resources, and we'll see you there.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.